Do it, but someone might see. The cowboy did it, and the whole town froze. The town was small enough that everyone noticed everything. If a truck drove past the main street twice in one day, people remembered it. If someone raised their voice at the grocery store, the story spread before sunset. Nothing stayed private for long, and everyone learned early how to keep their business quiet. The cowboy knew this better than most. He had lived here all his life. His boots had walked these dusty roads since he was a boy, first too big for his feet, later worn down by work and years. People knew his name, though he did not talk much. They knew his ranch sat just outside town, where the land opened wide and the fences stretched far. They knew he worked hard, paid his bills, and never caused trouble. That was how he liked it. Every morning followed the same pattern. He woke before the sun, fed the animals, checked the fences, and drank his coffee standing on the porch while the sky slowly changed color. By the time the town woke up, his hands were already tired. By the time the town talked, he was already busy. He did not come into town unless he had to. That day, he had to. The feed store was near the center of town, close to the diner and the post office. It was a place where people lingered, not just to buy what they needed but to see who else was around. The cowboy parked his truck and sat inside for a moment, watching through the windshield. Two men stood near the store entrance, talking loudly. A group of older women sat on a bench nearby, their eyes sharp despite their calm faces. Across the street, someone leaned against a wall, pretending not to look while looking at everything. The cowboy sighed and stepped out. As he walked, he felt the usual eyes on him. Some nodded, some stared, some whispered. He kept his face steady and his steps slow. He had learned long ago that rushing only made people curious. Inside the feed store, the air smelled of grain and dust. The floor creaked under his boots. He grabbed what he needed and headed for the counter, hoping for a quick exit. That was when he noticed the tension. It sat in the room like a tight wire, thin but ready to snap. Near the back, someone stood stiff and silent. A younger person, not from one of the big families in town. Their shoulders were tight, their hands clenched. In front of them stood another figure closer, blocking their path. The words were low, but the tone was sharp. The cowboy did not hear everything, but he did not need to. He had seen this before, not often but enough. A quiet corner, a raised voice held just under shouting, a situation that relied on silence to survive. Other people in the store noticed too. Some looked away quickly. Some pretended to focus on bags of feed. No one stepped in. No one ever did. The cowboy felt that familiar pull in his chest, the one he always pushed down. It was the voice that said, "Stay out of it." The voice that reminded him how small the town was, how long its memory lasted. He paid at the counter, nodded to the clerk, and turned toward the door. That was when he heard it, a voice close behind him, low and tight with fear. "Do it, but someone might see." The words were barely there, almost swallowed by the air, but they hit him harder than any shout. He stopped. For a second everything slowed. The creak of the floor faded. The murmur of the town outside disappeared. All he could hear was his own breath. He did not turn around right away. The warning made sense. In this town, being seen meant being remembered. It meant stories that twisted with every telling. It meant doors closing quietly and smiles becoming thin. The cowboy had spent years building a life where no one questioned him. He worked. He stayed quiet. He stayed neutral. Neutral was safe. He could walk out now. He could load his truck and drive back to the open land where problems felt smaller and voices did not echo. No one would blame him, but his feet would not move. He remembered being younger, standing beside his father at the auction yard. He remembered how his father had once stepped forward when everyone else stayed back. He remembered the look in his eyes, not anger, not pride, just certainty. "Sometimes," his father had said later, "you don't choose the moment chooses you." The cowboy felt that truth settle over him now. He turned slowly. The person who had spoken stood behind him, eyes wide, face pale. They did not ask again. They did not beg. The fear in their expression said enough. The other figure noticed the movement and stiffened. A small crowd had formed without meaning to. People always drifted toward trouble, even when they pretended not to. The cowboy became aware of every sound again, the rustle of clothing, the shift of weight, the silence growing heavier by the second. Outside, through the open door, he could see the main street. Cars passed slowly. Someone stopped walking. Someone was already watching. His heart beat harder now, not from fear alone, but from the weight of the choice pressing down on him. He knew that once he acted, whatever he did, there would be no taking it back. The town would remember. It always did. He thought of his ranch, his quiet mornings, his peaceful routine. He thought of the person standing behind him, hoping he would not turn away. The cowboy straightened his shoulders. He took one step forward. The room seemed to freeze. No one spoke. No one moved. Even the ones who had pretended not to notice were watching now. The cowboy felt every eye on his back, every thought forming before it was spoken. He did not know yet what he would say or how he would act. He only knew that the moment had arrived, and walking away was no longer an option. Outside, the town held its breath, and inside, the cowboy stood at the edge of a choice that would change far more than his own day. The silence did not break right away. It stretched, thin and heavy like the air before a storm. The cowboy stood there, one step forward, feeling every eye in the feed store settle on him. He did not rush. He had learned long ago that calm could be stronger than noise. The person in front of him shifted slightly, surprised that someone had finally stepped closer. The tension in the room grew sharper, but no one spoke. People waited. In a town like this, waiting was a habit. The cowboy took a slow breath. He could feel his heart beating, steady but firm. He reminded himself to stay controlled. Losing control would only give others something to use against him later. He looked around the store. He recognized almost everyone. The clerk at the counter who had watched him grow up. The man near the shelves who borrowed tools but never returned them. The women on the bench outside whose words could travel faster than any truck on the highway. This was not just a moment. It was a test. He thought about his past, not in big memories but in small ones. The kind that shaped him quietly. Long days working under the sun. Cold nights fixing broken fences alone. Learning early that talking less kept trouble away. When he was younger, he had made one mistake by speaking out too fast. The town had not forgiven him easily. It took years of silence and hard work to earn back trust. Since then, he had kept his opinions to himself. Until now. The cowboy looked at the person behind him again. Their hands were shaking slightly, not from weakness but from fear of what might happen next. Fear of being alone in front of everyone. That fear felt familiar. He remembered another time many years ago when he had stood in a similar place, younger and unsure. Back then, no one had stepped forward for him. He had learned to survive, but he never forgot how it felt. That memory settled his mind. He turned fully now, placing himself clearly between the two sides of the situation. Not aggressive, not loud, just present. "Is there a problem?" he asked calmly. His voice was steady, but it carried. It always did, even when he did not raise it. The question seemed simple, but it changed everything. It meant the situation was no longer private. It meant it was no longer hidden. The other figure hesitated. They had not expected resistance, especially not from him. People like the cowboy were supposed to mind their own business. That was the unspoken rule. A few seconds passed. Someone coughed. Someone else shifted their feet. "There's no problem," the figure finally said, but the words sounded weak. The cowboy did not move away. "Then it shouldn't be hard to step back," he replied. He did not accuse. He did not threaten. He simply stated what was fair. The person behind him let out a quiet breath, one they had been holding too long. Around them, the store felt smaller. The walls seemed closer. Everyone understood now that this was not something they could pretend not to see. The cowboy knew that even speaking was a risk. Every word could be twisted later, so he chose them carefully, like he chose his steps on uneven ground. He kept his hands relaxed at his sides. He kept his posture open. He showed no anger. That was important, because anger would give people an excuse to turn against him. The other figure took a step back, just a small one. It was enough. The tension loosened slightly, but it did not disappear. The moment was still fragile. One wrong move could break it. The cowboy glanced at the clerk, then at the others watching. He did not say anything more. He did not need to. His presence had already changed the balance. Slowly, the person who had caused the tension turned away. They muttered something under their breath and moved toward the door. No one stopped them. No one followed. When the door closed behind them, the store felt like it could breathe again. But the silence remained. People avoided each other's eyes now. Some felt relief. Others felt uncomfortable. A few felt annoyed that the quiet order of things had been disturbed. The cowboy knew what they were thinking. Why did he get involved? Why now? Why him? He helped the person behind him gather their things. He did not speak much. Just a small nod, a quiet gesture, enough to show support without drawing more attention. "Thank you," the person whispered. He nodded once more, then turned toward the door. That should have been the end of it, but in a small town, nothing ever ended that simply. Outside, the main street had slowed. People who had been passing by now stood still, pretending to check their phones or talk while watching closely. News had already begun to spread, carried by looks and half-heard words. The cowboy stepped into the sunlight. It felt brighter than before. He walked toward his truck, aware of every movement around him. He did not rush. Rushing would look guilty. Calm suggested confidence. As he reached the truck, he heard someone call his name. He paused. An older man stood a few steps away. Someone with influence, someone whose opinion mattered more than most. "That was brave," the man said quietly. The cowboy met his gaze. It was necessary. The man studied him for a moment, then nodded. "This town doesn't like change." "I know," the cowboy replied. They stood there for a moment, two men understanding more than they said. When the cowboy finally climbed into his truck and drove away, he felt the weight of the moment settle fully on his shoulders. The road stretched ahead, familiar but different now. By the time he reached the edge of town, his thoughts were heavy. He knew what would come next. Questions, whispers, judgments. Some would say he did the right thing. Others would say he should have stayed quiet. A few would see him as a threat to the order they were comfortable with. That night, as he worked on his ranch, he noticed how quiet everything felt. The wind moved through the grass. The animals settled. The sky darkened slowly. Normally, this was where his mind rested. Tonight, it did not. He replayed the moment over and over, the step forward, the words, the looks. He wondered if he could have handled it differently, if he had said too much or too little. He also thought about the person he had helped. He hoped they were safe. He hoped the town would not turn its attention toward them next. As darkness fell, lights appeared in the distance. The town, still awake, still talking. He knew that by morning, everyone would have a version of the story. Some would add details. Some would remove them. Some would change the meaning completely. That was the danger of being seen. The cowboy sat on his porch, holding a cup of coffee that had gone cold. He stared out at the land that had always been his escape. He realized something then. He had crossed a line he could not uncross. Even if he returned to silence, the town would remember that one moment when he did not. And deep down, beneath the worry and the weight, there was something else too. A quiet sense of peace. He did not know what tomorrow would bring, but he knew one thing for sure. When the moment came, he had not turned away. And in a town that watched everything, that choice would echo longer than any words. The next morning, the town felt different. Nothing had changed on the surface, but the air carried a quiet tension, like everyone was waiting for something to happen. The cowboy noticed it the moment he drove in to buy fuel. People looked up a little too quickly. Conversations stopped a little too suddenly. He kept his face calm and his movements slow. At the gas station, a man who usually joked with him only nodded once and turned away. Inside the diner, someone whispered his name without meaning to be heard. The cowboy pretended not to notice, but he felt it all. Every glance. Every pause. By noon, the story had grown. Some said he had stepped in without thinking. Others said he had planned it. A few said he had shown courage. A few more said he had crossed a line. The truth sat somewhere in the middle, but truth rarely mattered once people started talking. The cowboy went about his day as usual. He fixed a broken fence, checked on the animals, and worked until his hands were sore. Physical work helped quiet his thoughts. It reminded him that some things were real and solid, even when words were not. Still, the moment from the feed store stayed with him. He remembered how the room had gone still, how the silence had felt heavier than noise, how everyone had frozen, unsure of what came next. That silence had power. Later that afternoon, a truck pulled up near his ranch gate. He watched it from a distance, wiping his hands on his jeans. Visitors were rare, unexpected ones even more so. The driver stepped out slowly, someone from town. Not a close friend, but not a stranger either. I figured I'd find you working, the man said. The cowboy nodded. That's where I usually am. They stood for a moment, unsure how to begin. The man cleared his throat. People are talking, he said. I know. The man hesitated. Some are upset. I know that too. The man studied the ground. But some are glad someone finally did something. The cowboy did not answer right away. He leaned against the fence and looked out across the land. I didn't do it for praise, he said finally. And I didn't do it to cause trouble. The man nodded. That's what I told them. They talked a little longer, then the man left. As the truck disappeared down the road, the cowboy felt the weight of being understood by even one person. It mattered more than he expected. That evening, as the sun dipped low, he went into town again. He needed supplies, and hiding would only make things worse. This time, the eyes followed him openly. At the store, a woman approached him quietly. I just wanted to say thank you, she said, her voice soft. He nodded, unsure what to say. Another man passed by without looking at him at all. Then another stopped and shook his hand, firm and quick, as if afraid of being seen doing it. The reactions came in pieces, scattered and uneven. Support and silence mixed together. The cowboy realized something then. His action had not frozen the town forever. It had cracked it open. People were choosing sides now, even if they did not say it out loud. Later, outside the store, he saw the person he had stepped in for. They stood near the edge of the sidewalk, unsure whether to approach. Their eyes met. The cowboy gave a small nod. They walked over slowly. I wanted to check on you, they said. I heard some people were upset. I'm fine, he replied. Are you? They nodded. Better than I was. They stood there for a moment, the space between them quiet but steady. The cowboy noticed that others were watching again. The town never missed a second chance to observe. People might talk, the person said carefully. They already are. A faint smile crossed their face. I won't forget what you did. He watched them walk away, standing taller than before. That alone made the risk feel lighter. As night fell, the town buzzed softly. Lights stayed on later than usual. Conversations stretched longer. Everyone seemed to sense that something had shifted. The next day brought more change. At the weekly meeting held in the old hall, attendance was higher than normal. The cowboy stood near the back, arms crossed, listening. Issues that were usually rushed through were now discussed more carefully. Someone spoke up who never had before. Another person agreed instead of staying silent. Not everyone liked it. One voice rose, sharp and defensive. We've always handled things our way, the person said. We don't need troublemakers stirring things up. The room went quiet again. The cowboy felt the familiar pressure return, that heavy pause where everyone waited to see if someone else would speak. This time someone did, not him. Another voice followed, then another, calm, measured, honest. The cowboy realized that the moment in the feed store had done more than he knew. It had reminded people that silence was a choice, and choices could be changed. After the meeting, an older woman approached him. "You don't look like someone who wanted attention," she said. He smiled slightly. "I didn't," she nodded. "That's probably why it mattered." The days passed. The talk did not stop, but it softened. The sharp edges wore down. New routines formed around the old ones. The cowboy still worked his ranch, still drank his coffee on the porch, still kept mostly to himself. But he noticed small differences. People met his eyes more often. Some nodded with respect. Others avoided him, unsure. One afternoon, as he fixed a gate, a young boy rode by on a bicycle. The boy slowed and called out, "My dad says you did the right thing." The cowboy watched him pedal away, the dust rising behind him. That night he sat under the open sky and thought about how quickly a single moment could spread through a place like this. How one step forward could move many others, even without meaning to. He also thought about the risks still ahead. Change made people uncomfortable. Not everyone forgave easily, some never would. He was ready for that because he had learned something important. The town might freeze in moments of surprise. It might hold its breath when something unexpected happened, but it could move again. And when it did, it remembered who had been willing to stand still long enough to let others find their courage. The cowboy took a deep breath, listening to the quiet sounds of the land around him. Whatever came next, he knew he would face it the same way he had faced that moment in the store, calm, steady, and no longer invisible. The calm did not last long. In a small town, change never moved in a straight line. It came in waves, some gentle, some rough. The cowboy felt the next wave building before it reached him. It started with small signs. A supplier delayed an order without explanation. A neighbor who used to stop and talk now only waved from a distance. At the diner, his usual seat was suddenly taken and no one offered to move. No one said anything directly. They did not have to. The cowboy understood this kind of pressure. It was quiet, polite, and sharp in its own way. The town was testing him, seeing if he would bend back into silence. He did not react. He went on with his work as he always had, fixed fences, checked water lines, helped a neighbor with a broken gate without being asked. He let his actions speak because words would only feed the noise. Still, the weight followed him. One afternoon, a letter arrived. No name, just a few short lines, careful but cold. It warned him to remember his place and to stop causing discomfort. There was no threat, only suggestion. That made it worse. He folded the paper slowly and burned it in the old metal barrel behind his barn. Watching the words disappear into smoke, he felt something steady settle inside him. Fear faded when faced directly. That evening, someone else came to his ranch. This time, it was the person he had helped at the feed store. They looked nervous, glancing around as if the land itself might be listening. "I'm sorry," they said quickly. "I didn't mean for any of this to fall on you." The cowboy leaned against the fence. "You didn't cause it," he said. "It was already there." They looked relieved but still unsure. "Some people have been asking questions about me, about you," he nodded. "They always do." They stood quietly, the wind moving through the grass around them. Finally, the person straightened. "I won't back down," they said. "Not now." The cowboy met their eyes. "Good." After they left, he realized how far things had shifted. Before, fear had kept everyone apart. Now it was pushing some people together. The next day, trouble arrived openly. At the town hall, a discussion turned sharp. Voices rose. Old grudges surfaced. Someone pointed at the cowboy and said he was changing things that did not need changing. He did not respond right away. He waited for the noise to settle. "I didn't come to change the town," he said calmly. "I came to live in it with some respect." The room quieted. An older man stood up slowly, a man whose opinion carried weight. "Respect works both ways," he said, "and silence isn't respect." That moment mattered. It was the first time someone powerful had spoken openly in support of the idea behind the cowboys' actions. The conversation shifted after that, not smoothly, not easily, but forward. Later that week, something unexpected happened. The local paper ran a short piece. No names, no drama, just a careful account of a moment where someone stepped in and the town reacted. It framed the event not as trouble but as a question. What kind of place did they want to be? The article traveled faster than the writer expected. People read it at breakfast. They talked about it at work. They argued about it in the evening. The cowboy did not seek it out, but he felt its impact. More people greeted him again. Some apologized without saying the word. Some admitted they wished they had acted sooner. Others stayed distant but quieter. Then came the hardest moment yet. A long-time business partner visited him, face tight. "I can't keep working with you," the man said. "Not like this. It's bad for my standing." The cowboy listened without interrupting. "I understand," he said when the man finished. They parted without anger, but the loss cut deep. It was a reminder that courage had a cost that did not always show right away. That night the cowboy sat alone on his porch, the stars bright above him. Doubt crept in, slow and careful. Was it worth it? The answer came the next morning. He found his gate repaired, neatly, carefully, no note, just work done right. Later, someone dropped off extra feed without asking for payment. A child waved from the road and smiled wide. Small things, quiet things, they mattered. The town had not chosen a single side. It never would. But it was learning to speak in softer ways, to listen longer. The cowboy realized something important then. Change was not about winning. It was about staying steady long enough for others to find their balance. By the end of the week, the tension eased slightly. Not gone, never gone, but manageable. He walked through town one evening, hearing laughter again, seeing people linger instead of rush away. Life was continuing, reshaped but not broken. As he passed the feed store, he paused. The memory of that frozen moment returned, sharp and clear. He had no regrets. He understood now that the hardest part of doing the right thing was not the act itself. It was living with it afterward. And he was doing that, one quiet day at a time. Time did what it always did in the town. It kept moving, slow but steady, carrying the weight of what had happened and softening its sharpest edges. Weeks passed, then months. The moment that once froze the feed store became part of the town's memory, told with fewer hard words and more thought. The cowboy returned fully to his routine. Early mornings, long days, quiet evenings. From the outside, his life looked the same as before, but inside the town something had shifted and everyone felt it in small ways. People spoke more carefully now. Not louder, not braver in big ways, but more honest. When something felt wrong, someone mentioned it instead of swallowing it. When someone felt unsure, they asked questions instead of turning away. The cowboy noticed it first at the diner. A disagreement broke out over something small, the kind of thing that once would have ended with silence and resentment. This time, it ended with a calm conversation and an understanding nod. No raised voices, no cold stares. It surprised everyone. The cowboy sat at his table drinking his coffee, saying nothing. He did not need to. The change did not belong to him alone. Outside, life went on. Crops grew. Animals were born. Seasons turned. The town held festivals and quiet weekends like it always had. But beneath it all, there was a new awareness. People remembered that moment when everything stopped. They remembered how one person had stepped forward, not to lead, not to demand, but simply to be present. And they remembered how that presence had mattered. One afternoon, the cowboy received a visit from the older man who had spoken up at the meeting weeks ago. They sat on the porch, watching the sun lower itself over the land. "You know," the man said, "this place hasn't changed much in 50 years. The cowboy smiled slightly. "It doesn't like to," the man nodded. "But sometimes it needs to." They sat in silence, comfortable and unhurried. The cowboy understood something then. Change did not arrive like a storm. It arrived like a season, slow and easy to miss unless you paid attention. The person he had helped stopped by often now, not because they needed protection but because they wanted connection. They laughed more easily. They stood straighter. They spoke up in meetings and conversations. One day, they said, "I used to think keeping quiet was the only way to survive here." The cowboy looked out over the fields. "Quiet has its place," he said, "but so does standing firm." The town began to teach that lesson to itself. A young worker refused to be treated unfairly and was supported instead of pushed aside. A neighbor admitted a mistake and was forgiven instead of judged. A long-standing argument was finally resolved because both sides agreed to talk. None of it made headlines. None of it was dramatic, but it was real. The cowboy remained what he had always been: steady, private, reliable. He did not become a hero. People did not cheer when he walked into a room. He preferred it that way. What changed was how people looked at him. There was respect now, deeper than politeness. It was the kind that came from knowing someone would not turn away when it mattered. One evening, as the town gathered for a small event near the square, a child tugged at the cowboy's sleeve. "Why did you help that day?" the child asked, curious and open. The cowboy thought for a moment. "Because it was time," he said simply. The child nodded, satisfied, and ran off. That answer stayed with him, because it was time, not because he was special. Not because he was fearless, but because the moment had asked something of him and he had answered. As the year moved forward, the story became less about him and more about the town. People stopped saying, "When he did that," and started saying, "When we learned." The cowboy liked that better. One quiet morning he stood on his porch as the sun rose, the land stretching wide and familiar before him. He thought about how close he had come to walking away that day. How easy it would have been to stay silent. He felt no pride, only gratitude. Gratitude that he had listened to the part of himself that knew when to step forward. The town would never be perfect. He knew that. There would always be tension, fear, and disagreement. But now there was also memory, and memory could guide choices. When visitors came and asked about the place, people described it differently now. They spoke of hard work, strong roots, and a town learning how to look at itself honestly. The cowboy remained at the edge of it all, watching, working, living. One evening, as he drove past the feed store, he slowed for a moment. The door stood open. Voices drifted out, calm and ordinary. Life had filled the space where silence once froze everything. He drove on, the road stretching ahead. The town would remember that day for a long time, not because of drama but because of clarity. Sometimes, all it took to unfreeze a place was one person willing to stand still and be seen, and sometimes that was enough.